to fix this? Well, I'll talk about it and while we're getting the slide up here. It's just, it's table 34. There's table 31, 32, 33, 34 in his book. In table 34, and I'll just describe it here because I've got it on my iPad. He has a list of examples of what he calls multiple, and pardon me for the language, but orgasms in pre-adolescent males. And it's all on males. He has in here a 4-year-old male who he says had 26 orgasms in 24 hours. He also has a 5-month-old and an 11-month-old, a 2-year-old, and it goes on. Let's just pause for a few moments on the 4-year-old. A 4-year-old having an orgasm, what is that? He describes what it is. Hysterical, crying and reaction, but he describes it as something that they, although when you read the definition, it looks like they are resisting it, he describes it as something that's pleasurable. You have to ask yourself the question, this is the guy who changed human sexuality. This is the guy whose intent was to destroy Christianity. And this is the guy whose research has been cited by the United States Supreme Court as recently as 2003 and even beyond as bases for doing away with sodomy laws, bases for doing away with the normal marriage laws that Reagan signed away and did no-fault divorce, the interference with your spouse where you used to be able to sue them, the laws that are being used to challenge levels of consent. All of this is based upon Kinsey. And you have to ask yourself the question, how would he know that a child is having an orgasm? And how would, in fact, you would have 26 and 24 hours? You'd have to do torture to that particular child. Hopefully we'll get the chart up here. But if we don't, I ask you, just go to the internet and do some research on it. And I'd also encourage you to read Dr. Judith Reisman's book, Sexual Sabotage. It's a brand new book that came out in 2011, Sexual Sabotage by Dr. Judith Reisman. She is the foremost expert on Kinsey. And to understand what these kids are facing now, the sexual identity, homosexuality, pornography on the internet, you got to go back to where the foundation is, and the foundation started with Kinsey. And all of it was based upon fraud. Kinsey actually paid known child pedophile molesters to use stopwatches to time the reaction of the kids that were being sexually molested in terms of the time of their orgasms. And he then incorporated that into his research. And he used at least 9 people that we know of. And on that basis, he then extrapolated his perverted idea that people are sexual from birth. Sexual from birth, and therefore they must find their sexual identity. Next week in an adjacent state, in Maryland, we're having 2 people from our law school attend an event sort of undercover. It's an event where it's being led by a reputable researcher from Johns Hopkins University who believes that pedophilia is fine, that it is healthy. And it's a conference that's going on right here for the academics to come to in Maryland. What's happening, people, is the sexualization of our children. And there's the chart. This is from Kinsey's book.
Thank you, Mia.
I mean, you have to ask yourself the question, why was this not ever challenged when it began? Well, it was. Maslow challenged it. But Rockefeller Foundation pumped tons of money into Kinsey and then put an institute at Indiana University where it is today, and ultimately overpowered any objections to the contrary. If you just take a look at this chart, you're going to have to say this entire sexual revolution that we are experiencing is based upon absolute fraud, criminal activity, and sexual abuse of children. And it was that kind of information that ultimately hit the academic institutions that went into changing Hugh Hefner, that went into the pamphleteering, and now we have it explosively available to everybody via the internet.
Yes, Eric.
Just as I was listening to Donna and Matt share about fraud versus truth, and going back to this issue of identity, we were created through relationship, in relationship, for relationship. The first thing that God said was not good was that man should be alone. And so when he said that, imagine if you're Adam for a minute and you're walking with God and he looks at you and he says, Eric, it's really not good that you're alone. I would have been tempted to look at God and go, but Lord, what's... So what he was saying is, in my design of you, I've also created in you the need for human relationship. And so we all are born with belonging needs. And when those belonging needs are distorted or frustrated, young people go into life finding some need to belong to something. And in some of the work I've done with gangs and people have come out of cults and the occult, people are willing to trade reality and bad behavior for a little bit of love and belonging. It doesn't matter if they know the behavior is wrong or even criminal. As long as I belong to you or something, it meets that belonging need and they get trapped into it. Kind of like, Matt, what you were sharing about the students in Portland, your granddaughter. Because it's like, if these people will just be my friend, I'll buy in to the lie. A famous study was done a number of years ago studying peer pressure, which all of you that work with teens know that teens in particular are vulnerable to peer pressure. And in this experiment, the researcher had a large red dot and a large blue dot on a sheet of paper. There were 15 teens that were in the exam room at a given time, but 14 of the 15 had been clued in ahead of time. So only one of the teens was really the subject of the experiment. And so the researcher told the other 14 teens, says, listen, when I come into the room and ask you what color these two dots are, I want you to say they're both blue. One's red, one's blue. And they always made sure that 15th teenager was the last one asked. So that 15th teenager had to watch 14 of his or her age peers when he went around and said, what color are these? Both blue, both blue, both blue, both blue. And when they got down to that 15th teenager, 76% of the time, that 15th teenager said they were both blue. And when they debriefed them afterwards to say, did you really think they were both blue? They would always say, well, of course not. Well, then why did you say so? And all the reasons, well, I didn't want to seem different. I didn't want to seem stupid. I wanted people to like me. I wanted to be part of the group. And so willing to trade reality for a little bit of acceptance. Someone reran the experiment some years later, and they just had one of the 14 say it was red and blue. So you still have 13 teens saying both blue, but one said red and blue. That 15th teenager, that percentage dropped from 76% to 37%. So here's the principle, as Donna was talking about truth and Matt talking about fraud. As people who work with teens and in life, we have to be purveyors of the truth. And one person challenging the fraud and the distortion that the enemy tries to put out there and says, no, this is truth. May God multiply a 50% drop in that to even greater. So as you give the truth to these teens, as you say, you were created in God's image. You do belong to Him. He wants to belong to you. You're created for a relationship. We're for you. And let me challenge that distorted thinking or that distorted behavior. I believe that as people receive the truth, that truth will set people free. And that's scriptural.
Can I come back to Josh for a minute? I know you have a comment on that, but I also want to ask you more from the counseling and educational perspective. What are you teaching now to the counselors and the students to try to get ahead of this issue, to try to get, caught up to where these teens are in terms of what's going on with social media and their ability to, do a bad thing and kind of make it known worldwide almost immediately?
Yeah, and it plays into kind of my comments, so I'll just start with the thought.
I'm just lucky that way.
One of the things that I was made aware of, my beautiful wife Christy is sitting in the back, and she's from Canada. And we were in Canada last September for one of her friend's weddings. And one of the things that she said to me, because Canada is a lot more pluralistic society than America, she said, just don't talk about Obama up there. They all love him. So don't say anything wrong. Don't say anything mean about him. Don't say anything, don't say anything out of the ordinary. Just stay away from politics altogether, if you will. And so, I just, so when we went there, my curiosity, I got to know one of these guys. I stayed with him and that sort of thing, and we kind of started connecting. And so I disobeyed my wife. It's the only time I've ever done it, okay? So, the only time I've ever done it. So, but we started talking about it. And it was around the time that the healthcare debate was so huge. And he said, Josh, what's amazing about the United States is the divisiveness and the passion behind politics in the United States that you don't see here in Canada. He said, we in Canada, we don't care as much in a lot of ways. And so what ends up happening is there's a lot of issues, and this goes into a bit deeper conversation I don't want to get into, but just to make his point, that there's a lot of issues that issues getting passed by politicians that Canadians don't necessarily care about. And he said what's going to end up happening in Canada is one day Canada's going to wake up and they're going to look and they're going to say, it's too late. There's nothing I can do because I didn't take a stand. I was apathetic to it. And the same thing is happening in America with technology. Facebook, Twitter. Imagine your life, what it was like without a cell phone. We can't do that anymore. Think about the things that are being imposed upon you, and you don't even stop to think about it. You don't even stop to realize it. How hard is it for you to honestly turn your cell phone off for a week? Turn your computer off for a week. A day, even a day. Just shut everything down. And my wife will thank you later. But honestly, all of these things are being imposed upon us, and we no longer, like we used to, go next door to find sugar if we run out. We don't sit on the front porch on the rocking chair with our neighbors. We don't converse face-to-face anymore. We do not unplug. And we're seeing the effects of this literally in the brain like crazy. And here's what's amazing about this. And this is what I wish we could expose this. The Kinsey stuff, the sexuality stuff, all of this by looking at the sign. The Bible is amazing. The Beatitudes say, blessed are those who are pure, for they will see God. The reality of that is so true because impurity, what impurity, sexual images, these things connecting, hooking up, one-night stands, the brain can't tell a difference between a one-night stand and a long-term relationship when the dopamine is going on in the brain. That's why we see such heartache and emotional chaos for people who break up in relationships.